Hello there. You are listening to KPCA.FM in Petaluma, California. If you're listening on the radio, you got us at 103.3 FM. And you are here with DG the 30-something with the State of the Union show. So, I am very excited today because I get to interview the candidates for Petaluma City Council. And so I'm going to give my little spiel here before we start. And I think you missed the beginning because I'm always still learning how to use this board properly. So you're here on KPCA FM 103.3, Petaluma, California, with State of the Union with myself, DG the 30-something. So I am very excited to offer the opportunity for local candidates to speak about the issues facing Petaluma. And you can check out the full schedule. We have a couple different producers that are dealing with, or not dealing with, but interviewing candidates. So you can get all that on the schedule at kpca.fm. And so what is expressed here, of course, does not reflect the opinions of KPCA, PCA, or its members, and no endorsements will be made over the air. So the second half of this show will be opened up for public questions. So you can email questions to domayne@maberme.com. You can ask questions via phone at 707-981-7577 or on the DG the 30-something Facebook page. So if you're on there, you're probably on there already. The phones are being answered by my content producer, Melissa, out there. So that's who you're going to hear first, and she is sending them over to me. For the purposes of these interviews, we'd like the questions to address future issues and the candidate's strategy to address those issues within Petaluma. I'd like to stay away from questions regarding political affiliation, voter history, or the like. And then all questions will be submitted to me anonymously, so we don't have to worry about who wants to be named and who doesn't. So let's get started. I am here with Mike Harris, and I am going to let him introduce himself.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dominica, and thank you to KPCA for having this opportunity to speak about the issues in Petaluma. As way of a personal introduction, obviously Mike Harris, I was on the city council for 3 terms or 12 years. I moved to Petaluma actually in 1994, and to have a little background, I guess I was born in Santa Rosa, and then I left there when I was about 1 year old, and I moved to Woodland until I was about 6. Then I moved to Placerville, just outside Sacramento, and just grew up there through my teenage years, and then decided to come to Sonoma State for college out here. And after college, I got my degree in accounting, minor in economics, and I stayed in the area. Decided to move to Petaluma in 1994, and bought a house on the east side, in the northeast side, in one of the Kaufman and Broad homes by the old G&G, the second Safeway. I stayed there for about 10 years, and then I moved to the west side, and I've been there for about 14 years. So I've been in Petaluma about 24 years overall. So I was honored to get involved in city politics. Like I said, I served on the city council for 12 years. I was elected in 2002. Was honored to be reelected in 2006, and then again reelected in 2010. And I ran for mayor in 2014, lost by 84 votes. We're the only directly elected mayor in all of Sonoma County. All the other ones are rotational for 1 year, except for Santa Rosa, which is 2 years. And the mayor spot in Petaluma is directly elected for a 4-year term, and it's inside our city charter, which is our city's constitution, essentially, that it puts that in the charter that it's a directly elected mayor. So now I'm running for mayor again here in 2018, and I'm looking forward to the discussion about the issues. Been going door to door a lot, meeting a lot of people, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about the issues.
Awesome. So let's go on to the next question. So what policies, strategies, or the like do you propose to manage the rapid growth in Petaluma while preserving the small town and historic charm? And during my first show, I was asked to define rapid, so I consider that within the last 15 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting about Petaluma is we do have a general plan that dictates our growth, and I was part of that process in the mid 2006, 2007 when we analyzed the general plan. And it's interesting when you go through the general plan process, it actually takes a couple of years, and you actually look at almost every piece of land throughout the entire city and look at the aggregate zoning that you would want per piece of property for the entire city. The city goes through a lot of processes. For instance, we did have the Central Petaluma specific plan that gave rise to the downtown core and the revitalization of our downtown core, which I think is beautiful. I was proud to be part of that process, to be one part of the Central Petaluma specific plan. And then there was about $100 million in infusion of capital to revitalize the downtown core, while simultaneously I think we preserved our small town charm. Now we have the station area plan that's going to have the analysis around the train station that I think will continue to keep that small town charm as well. So we have the plans in place. What a lot of people are seeing right now is a pent-up demand that has happened, unfortunately, because since this plan was put forth, the general plan that is in 2006, 2007, we all know what happened to the world economy. So a lot of people just weren't building anything. They just couldn't, and everyone stopped for years. So what you're seeing now is a lot of pent-up demand, and all of it's happening at one time. So a lot of people are seeing it all at once, and there should be more of an absorption policy so it doesn't happen all at once, and our infrastructure actually needs to keep up with it. But we do have some great plans in place in order to continue to protect us. And it'll be interesting. We're going to have a full discussion coming up now that the general plan actually expires in 2025. We will have another discussion about 2023 about the general plan in the future. I think that's a future question, so I'll save that, actually.
Sounds good. So what additional issue not addressed above is high on your list to address if elected into office?
There's a lot. So one of the big ones is I'm out there talking to people, and again, walking door to door and talking to people, is that the city council, they deal with a lot of just bread and butter issues. It just make sure your water's turned on, your trash is picked up, make sure you get across town, the traffic circulation, make sure the police and fire show up when you need them. You know, the assemblymen, they deal with very important issues in Sacramento. The congressmen, they deal with very important issues in Washington, D.C. But here at your council members or mayor, we drive on the same streets. You'll see us at the ball game, at the Little League games. You'll see us at the grocery store. So we have to actually articulate our vision to people as we're out in the community. And one of the big ones is just traffic. A lot of people are just trying to get across town, take their kids to the ball game, get downtown to spend money, and they just get stuck in traffic, and they just get frustrated about how long it takes. And that's why I'm a big proponent of the Rainier Crosstown Connector and interchange, because I do feel that will alleviate traffic. And we've gone a long way. I know when I talk to people out there, it's Mike, it's taken so long to get to this point. And I agree, it's frustrating. It's taken a long time. However, we've made the incremental steps in order to get to where we are. If you read in the paper about 3 or so months ago, we did, as the city, and we're actually through Sonoma County Transportation Authority, got that last $85 million for the widening of the 101 through Petaluma. We all know it's widened north of Petaluma and widened south of Petaluma, but the last little piece inside wasn't widened. The CTC finally put aside the $85 million for that. The point of that is the city years ago decided to coordinate with Caltrans to actually split into 2 project study reports, so we have a crosstown connector like Corona and then an interchange to follow. So the point is we've kept the cost low in order to do that, and on top of that we have some traffic mitigation fees that have been set aside to pay for the first phase of Rainier. And when we approved the Freedman's Center that went in years ago, there was a land set aside next to the dog park. So the point of all that is we've made incremental steps from the land set aside, the traffic mitigation fees. We've coordinated with Caltrans, we're coordinating with the Sonoma County Transportation Authority as well. So that's one of the big issues, it's just traffic in town. And I think the Rainier Crosstown Connector will be a huge piece and component in order to alleviate that.
All right. So you already mentioned the upcoming general plan updates. It seems like a ways out, but actually I was a part of the last process too. So things start getting moving quickly. So I guess based on those general plan updates, where do you see Petaluma in 10 to 15 years?
Continue to have managed growth, because inside the general plan and at the same time, I should say, there's an urban growth boundary that protects us from sprawl, and that's what gives Petaluma its charm, is not just being like any town. It has an urban growth boundary around it, so we can't continue to grow outside. That expires in 2025 as well, and that was voted on by a vote of the people, so that'll have to be re-upped and put on the ballot again to continue that to coincide with the new general plan. But you're right, it's a long process, and it's a good process. It's a lot of it's hundreds of hours of hearings, multiple hearings, different groups get together, and this is where the community really shines, because how many people get involved. We already actually have money set aside in the budget for the city's budget in our reserves to pay for the general plan update here in the coming year. So it's good that we're already planning for it. And that process will probably start in around the 2023 time frame to start talking about that. And I look forward to that process.
Alrighty. So, is there any additional information you'd like to provide, or?
Sure. I only gave you one issue, so I can go back. So
whatever you want to do.
We kept going forward, which is fine. There's some other big issues. The Fairgrounds, that's a huge issue in town. What's interesting is that what a lot of people don't know is the Fair Board is appointed by the governor. Of course, the city council and the mayor, they're elected by the citizens of Petaluma. Well, both groups are different. They have to come together and actually find the greatest and best use of the fairgrounds right now. What people don't realize is that we are in a 50-year lease. We're at the 45th year of the 50-year lease. The lease at the fairgrounds expires in 2023. Right now, the Fair Board can't get bonding capacity to upgrade the facilities at the fairgrounds because there's only 5 years left. No one will give them bonding capacity to upgrade the facilities. If you go out there, you'll see some of the areas are dilapidated, unfortunately. So they have the incentive to come to the table. Now the city, we have an incentive to have them come to the table as well, because we only get $1 a year for that land. Remember, 45 years ago, this land was at the edge of town, out of sight, out of mind. Well, now it's in the middle of town, and it's one of the most prime pieces of property. And we can do some great things there, and it's very exciting to be a part of that process. One of the things that I've been talking about is actually having a convention center there of some sort. We can keep the fair there. We need to keep it there for our agricultural roots and just a nod to our heritage and history. But if we had a convention center there as well, the Fair Board and the Fairgrounds Committee, they could use the convention during the fair, and then the city could have it the remaining 49 weeks of the year. We could attract some great attractions to town. We're so uniquely positioned as a city that we have the train in the middle of town. And if we could upgrade D Street, we could have a nice walking promenade to the fairgrounds, and on top of that, go to a convention center, and we could really be a huge draw into town. And I look forward to being a part of that process. So I know that'll be ramped up as well. So there'll be some big issues that come before us, from the general plan that we already talked about that'll be up in 2023. This lease comes up in 2023, so we have to talk about it way before that, probably in 2020 or 2021. We need to talk about that now. So that's a huge issue as well. Since I brought up the train, one of the other big issues is the second train station. It's been talked about that potentially a second train station in the northern quadrant. I think that would be huge to have a second train station up there for many reasons. One is everyone sees the housing that's being built there. But if we can have the train station, the second one, near where people are living, that would be even better. And on top of that, you don't build a train station because of this, but there is Lagunitas up there as well, so it can help with the attraction. And I know people have been talking about creating a brewery district of some sort up in that area to have yet another reason to go up in that quadrant. And on top of that, there's close to 3,000 jobs up there as well, so it would actually help the employers with the people that they're trying to attract for all their open positions.
Sounds good. All right. So I also found out the city bus goes over there, so that's a really cool thing to take advantage of. I found that out recently. It goes from downtown right to where all the breweries are.
Yeah.
So this has been a question I've asked personally for myself. I grew up on the east side, and then I now live on the west side, but the census tract that I live in, this is, I always say, it's putting my public health hat on. The census tract where I used to live, right around the past Bernard Eldridge, but right a little bit further from that, is now the one of the poorest census tracts in the city, and we in public health know that they have really bad poor health outcomes. So that's not really it's important to me, but the point of my question is, how do we kind of bridge this gap? Even when I was in high school, there's always this joke, like, you don't cross the train tracks, even as an east side kid. And I think we're kind of at this point where that issue has to be addressed.
So yes, as I'm out there, a lot of people talk about this EastWest Divide. I don't necessarily personally buy into it, but I get it's a frustration of some people. What I've talked about also, when I was just talking about the fairgrounds, but what I think is also, since what you need to know is that since we as the city own the fairgrounds, we can actually dictate what goes there. So through an RFP process, we can say this is what we want and hope for. So with that said, we could have a city hall there. We could hopefully put a new fire station there or a police station. So it can actually bring the community together by having it in the middle of town, and it can kind of get rid of that east-west divide that people kind of buy into. But I think that would help alleviate that.
And so you talked about the RFP process. You want to get into that? Because I know when I talk to a lot of people, I'm in that world and that's part of what I do, but I think it's something that a lot of people don't understand.
Sure. So, again, you're going to be talking to two different government agencies. So it's going to be the appointed by the governor, the Fairgrounds group, and then you have the city council, and they both have to follow government procedures. So the groups first will have to get together. I know they're going to do a feasibility analysis right now. I've heard it's in draft format, and since I'm not on the city council, they've been discussing that in closed sessions, what I hear, so I haven't had access to that. So they are talking about that in closed session. So, eventually the groups will have to come together, have an open hearing, discuss what they want to happen at that property, and once they discuss in an open session what they want, then we'll have to put together kind of the list of criteria, and that's kind of what an RFP will be, that what we want to see as a city, and then it can be farmed out to different individuals or different groups or different developers. Say, this is what we're looking for, please bring your best project forward. And when they bring the project forward, it has to go through the normal process, through the planning commission, etc., up to the city council eventually. But the RFP process is that, just basically outline exactly what we want to see there. And since we own the land, we can dictate what goes there, unlike when there's private property rights involved.
So another question I've been asking on all my shows is that I am a local small business owner. I actually like to call myself a micro business owner because the definitions of small business varies from 100 to 500. So but there are a lot of micro businesses or small businesses in Petaluma. And I'm wondering, due to the lack of small office space, for me personally, I struggle with the fact that I can't get cable internet and stuff in my office because the conduit's not there. And they redid all the fiber for Sonic on the other side of town, but downtown. And I realize it's an issue to pull all that up. Mm-hmm. But, the main question for me is, how do we help the economic development process in Petaluma, and then also not lose kind of these small companies that do employ people, do provide, taxes, even though it's not 100 people, 200 people, 300 people, and kind of elevate, I guess, these I always call them non-traditional businesses. They're not brick and mortar. They're kind of hidden.
Right. So first off, our economic development manager, Ingrid Alverdi, does an incredible job. First off, she had to do the wind down process of our redevelopment agency. Then she deals with retention issues with the companies that are here, and she is proactively going out to the small businesses, to the large businesses, to see what needs they have in order to make sure they stay here. Because usually when a business has already made the decision to leave, you can't undo that because they've already made the decision or signed a lease somewhere else. So she proactively goes out to these businesses for retention purposes. And when you see all the open vacancies, she actually proactively goes out there and tries to find people to fill those vacancies, which helps with the tax base. And then when there's 300 more people that are eating downtown and spending money, that just kind of helps with the multiplier effect of monies. However, with what you were asking, the city doesn't have an extra pot of money now. Now that the Redevelopment Act has actually been wound down years ago, which we can get to that issue as well, the city doesn't have that pot of incentive money that it was able to use in the past. So it'll actually have to really lean on Ingrid Alverdi and her immense talents in order to really kind of make that happen.
All right. Well, did you want to get into the other issue? Sure.
So,
and want to explain that a little bit?
So what redevelopment is, so years ago, Governor Brown, when he was trying to balance the state budget, he did away with redevelopment through his budgetary process. Now, I don't remember if it was Palm Desert or Palm Springs, but he held up that, look what these cities are doing. They're using redevelopment funds to build golf courses. But if you reflect on what Petaluma did with it, and we did great things with it in terms of using it for affordable housing, we revitalized our downtown core, and we were able to do some great things and paving of some roads. So unfortunately, that went away. So that was one pot of money that went away. What redevelopment dollars are is that if you look at a blighted area and you you have a development that happens there. The tax increment that happens from that 100% goes to the city. Now, in the normal process, when you pay your property taxes, most people say, wow, the city's probably getting rich off that because we have so many expensive homes, especially here on the west side. But the city only gets about 23% of those property taxes. The rest has to flow out to the other agencies, from government agencies or county agency, etc. We get 23%. In the redevelopment world, we would get 100% of the tax increment that gave us the incentive to clean up blighted areas, which we did in the downtown core. And that was a nice pot of money that we can use for incentives. That went away. I'm hoping with the new governor, whomever it is, it's most likely going to be Gavin Newsom in January, that we can actually talk to our representatives in Sacramento to have a redevelopment part 2 of some sort, and then we can really hyper focus it on it, maybe affordable housing or items like that. So then we would have another pot of money, because the city obviously has some challenges, which we can get to that as well in terms of our budget. But then we have another challenge or another pot of money to use for those types of things.
Yeah, sounds good, because running a company in California is already hard enough.
Yes, yes it is. I hear that a lot. Just being on the chamber board of directors, you hear that. I'm an executive for a financial services company here in town. We have about 15 openings, so you see it from all points of view.
Well, and I guess I do kind of want to get into the affordable housing issue. There is no easy answer to address it, but I maybe it's just some ideas or brainstorming, because we see, a lot of people that work in Petaluma have to commute to Marin, San Francisco, even Contra Costa County. Mm-hmm. And, how can we remedy the issue to allow people to make enough money here to live here?
Mm-hmm. It's a tough one, because when you hear in that example you just gave, when people are driving an hour or hour and a half or maybe 2 hours, that's simply a quality of life issue, and you can see why people get mad in their car, everything, get frustrated, and then they don't have enough time with their kids, and then they're getting home late, and they just have time to put food on the table and go to sleep and go do it again the next day. And the other problem with that is you have less people that are going to get involved with city committees and that type of thing. So you're taking out a whole group of people that aren't going to get involved in the city because they have to drive so far to their work. But in terms of affordable housing, it's such a huge issue across the board, from employers trying to attract talent to the citizens here that are trying to afford to stay here. One of the ways to alleviate it potentially is what I just mentioned about redevelopment. If we had a redevelopment part 2, at least we might have a pot of money there at that point we can actually use for hopefully affordable housing. I've also heard discussed, and I'm supportive of this, at least looking at it in terms of looking at industrial zones and see if we want to zone that or change the zoning or have a mixed use zoning to allow residential in certain industrial areas as well, because there's at least free up some of the areas there that are underutilized right now. I know that currently the city council is discussing to change the fees on developers in terms of the in lieu fee versus mandating having the affordable housing inside the development. I support that policy of either mandating 15% of the affordable housing units to be put into the development versus them paying 20% of an in lieu fee into a pot of money. The problem that we're running into in the city is we're just simply running out of land, and so we should mandate that affordable housing component to be inside the development, because even if they gave us the 20% set aside, it takes us years to aggregate the dollars together to then purchase a piece of land to build affordable housing when there's barely any land left. So that's another piece. I know the city council is doing that, and I do support that. And also in our downtown core, since we do have the station area plan that moved forward, we probably need to build up in the inner core down there near the train station as well and have affordable housing units there. So it's multifaceted. It's a huge issue, region-wide, California-wide, in the Bay Area. A lot of people are struggling with it, but those are some quick little pieces that we can do. But it's going to continue to be an issue.
Well, I was going to ask you about parking. I think you kind of touched on that in the downtown area. Again, as a downtown business owner, I constantly have my clients and colleagues texting me like, I'm trying to find parking. I'll be there as soon as possible. So, in a snippet, how you talked about building up, but how does that, how can that potentially be addressed?
Sure, and the station area plan does call for another structure, parking structure. So then it comes down to working with whomever is going to build to mandate another structure of some sort. But yeah, parking continues to be an issue. Yeah, it's frustrating to people, but it's not San Francisco at least. But it is a big issue. But it does in the future in the stationary plan mandate another structure, so that would be great. But we can always be looking at that, changing the times, or I know some people have talked about lengthening the times in certain area from 2 hours to 3 hours. I mean, that all should be looked at. But I know the Petaluma Downtown Association is always looking at this issue.
All right, so I do have a question from the public about, of course, we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the fires in Sonoma County. And so basically the question is how do we deal with emergency preparedness going forward in the city? You don't really touch on the county, but I think as the city of Petaluma, even though it's a county-wide issue, but how do we kind of prepare, because these fires were shocking and it was kind of a scramble to address them?
Sure. So in Petaluma, the Petaluma Fire Department has actually the major responsibility for the emergency coordination for the city. So we've actually had to invoke the emergency communications group a few times from the floods that happened and the local flooding, the winter storms that have happened. So we've actually had to do it for the city. We all know recently in the last year we had to invoke it because we actually had to be a place of refuge for the other areas that were affected by the fires. Unfortunately we weren't, but we were able to be here for the people here at the Fairgrounds and have that the Fairgrounds that was a needed resource during that time. So I guess the question is, are we prepared? The answer is yes, we are prepared. And the fire department has an action plan they analyze through the county and they bring it to the council. I haven't been on the council in a couple of years, so I haven't seen their latest one, but they would always bring their action plan and show what they were prepared to do. And they actually have systems in place to be invoked if anything like that happened, and the city staff would become commanders of certain areas. So the city is prepared, and that should help allay any fears. We just know everything was activated because something huge happened in our region that we all felt.
So as far as this plan that the fire department has, would that then be through city council minutes, or how do people access that?
Most likely, because there's probably a report on the staff report that's attached to when they gave their action plan. And I remember when I was on the council, every year they would actually come before the council and give an update of how they were prepared. And they even talked about, we focused on the Fairgrounds because everyone saw that as an area of refuge along with Lucchese Center, but they actually talked about also at the airport, what the airport would be used for in case of a huge emergency, how if planes would have to fly in, etc., and helicopters, if an earthquake happened and you didn't have access to a certain portion of the town and how that would be used. So, but yes, that is available in the city council minutes online.
Okay, you can probably hit up your city clerk
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Been missing that a lot. They're great at getting information to you right away.
Yes.
So this was kind of touched on earlier because as someone that's really civically engaged, there's a lot of offices that are very hard for me to think about getting involved in because I work full time and I don't necessarily have the flexibility to be involved because it's a lot of work. If you don't know the viewers, it's a whole lot of work to be on city council. It's a whole lot of work to be the mayor. You're not getting a full-time salary or anything like that to, be in those positions. So how, after the last federal election, we saw a lot more younger people getting involved in the elections, but do you have any ideas or are you working on anything to kind of get the younger people more engaged in the city?
Sure. I mean, that's a huge issue. When I was originally elected to the city council, I was 31 years old, turning 32. I'm 47 now. I'm very blessed to live and work in the same town. My job used to be in Roanoke Park. Well, that's not far at all. It's just some logistical sometimes when you're having to get to town to get to meetings, etc. So you can see why people don't get involved because they don't have time to. And we already talked about the traffic issue, and it takes them hours to get back. So the last thing I want to do is get involved with that. But in terms of the youth, we do have a youth commission. On top of that, the youth are so social media driven. They understand technology and access to technology and how to leverage technology. So as a government, we need to embrace technology as much as possible. I knew about 5-6 years ago, it's probably longer than that because I've been off the council before, so maybe 7 years ago or so, there was a discussion on whether to allow even have iPads at the city council. Well, that seems pretty low level now, like that. Of course you should be allowed to have that, but that's one of those things of using technology and leveraging technology and getting that involved. We need to continue to do that because I think that's how the youth are getting engaged and involved, and how they get activated is by technology. And we need to embrace that and change our systems to allow that if it's remote or how they get involved. There's certain groups I was never able to get involved with personally in terms of committees because they would meet at 1 o'clock and they didn't allow you to call in, and by the time you drive in it's an hour and the meeting's an hour and it's an hour to get back, so it's essentially your day, and it chops your day in half, so you would be hard to serve on those committees. So I felt it and lived it and had to not accept certain appointments in the past because of that. So we need to leverage technology in order to get the youth more engaged if we want to keep them engaged, because they are so engaged now because of what's happening nationally.
Yeah, that website's pretty antiquated. Just gonna say.
No, I agree, and it takes money to update that. So I agree, but everything's going to take money, and there's so many number one priorities in the city. Probably like the police and all of the vacancies they have in their group. I don't know if you happen to see that next door post from the police chief about a week, 10 days ago or so, but that's a huge issue. So there's a lot of number one priorities that are competing for the same general fund dollars.
Yeah, I gotta give Nick's a little plug too, because that was going back to the emergency preparedness. That was, if you don't have that app on there, it really helps quite a bit getting good information out there. And using social media, and it was very difficult during that emergency situation to get good and up-to-date information. There's a lot of different stuff going on. And so kind of keeping on that young person gauge, I was, if you don't know, viewers, I've said it many times, I was a part of the Teen Council, is what it used to be called. I was one of the founding members. I've been in Petaluma for almost all my life. And the biggest change that I've seen is that, and I'm not knocking the Youth Commission, but we used to address way more social issues. And so I'm wondering, again, back to that we've obviously seen a huge change in how everyone, not just young people, are being involved. And I guess it's kind of, this is a nonpartisan election, but how can potentially, or is it even appropriate for city council and mayoral candidates or people that are in those seats to kind of be a part of these broader social issues that are going on in the country?
Oh, of course. They should be definitely involved, and the youth will see the elected leaders are involved, so that's kind of a bridge for them to see that that's why they're involved and why they should continue to be involved. So I embrace that. People should get involved in whatever social issue that is their number one issue, no matter where you are in the political spectrum. Get involved, because once you're involved, then you stay involved. The things you focus on may change over time, but you're going to stay involved in some capacity, and that's the key. Is once you're involved, you stay involved. And I embrace that. In terms of the Youth Commission, in terms of its purview and what it focuses on, no, I agree. We should always be re-looking at all of the purview of what our individual groups, if it's commissions or committees, and what they're doing. So, updating the Youth Commission is always one we can look at. We tended to look at the purview of those groups every couple of years as well on the council.
Well, I think that's a good point, because there are a lot of committees and commissions, and it's my personal opinion that those scopes should be looked at. And
things get antiquated, things change, and just like anything, you always need to keep re-looking at it to freshen it up. Yeah,
and I think it's gotten better, but in some respects, but we used to have a teen center, and there was this big fight over the skate park, which is still there. But I always say, in a lot of the work I do, is that the teenagers is a forgotten generation. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of support for kids, or there's a lot of support for potentially high school students in school. Mm-hmm. But I always see this huge gap in not just necessarily recreational activities, but and again, the city's, we got
somewhere to go.
Yeah, well, not only where to go, like, I get it, the city's strapped, and I have a lot of my ideas that you can see on election night if you want to tune in, but I guess I'm just wondering, beyond the engagement, how do we keep them out of trouble? And again, it's not just recreational. I really believe that this is like a forgotten generation across the country. It's very hard to get funding for teen programs.
Yeah, no, it's just the typical fighting for the few resources that are left in the general fund. Our general fund is only about $46 million for the entire city. The overall budget's about $170 million, but for the general fund, which pays for police and fire and potholes, etc., is about $46 million. So there's always a competition for the same dollars, and costs continue to go up. If it's PERS or the pension liabilities, or if it's cost of health care, and it's, things continue to go up, and we just need to keep attracting business to town, or we'll never be able to address these certain issues. But yes, we need to have these opportunities for the teens. I know that we had the community service, the community officers are going back into the schools, which I've heard might be pulled out now because of the staffing issues. But separately, that's how you keep kids out of trouble as well, by having those. But that's another issue in terms of competition for dollars and vacancies in our police department that have currently 15 vacancies, and we could touch on that if you want to. So that, I mentioned briefly earlier about, I heard Chief Savano had actually put something out on Nixle, and on Nextdoor, and it was a whole full analysis. And what happens is, in the national average for cities that are in the 50,000 to 99,000 population, which is us, the national average is about 1.7 officers per thousand, and the California average is 1.4, and we are actually at 1.06. Our own general plan that we all approved, it says 1.3, but we're currently at 1.06. So you can see the difference. It should 1.7 nationally, 1.4, 1.3 we put in our documents, and we're at 1.06. And that equates to, we should have about 77 sworn officers. So we're about 15 short. And what happens when we're short? Certain areas get shorted as well. So including the community service officers in the schools. And that continues to be an issue. We need to rectify that on a go-forward basis.
So I think this is a really good follow-up question too, is that I was not aware of the budget, because sometimes I like to do these so I can learn on my own and then interpret information, which I hope the public is doing too. So you talked about the differentiation between the general fund and the rest of the funding. Do you kind of want to just touch on, for people that don't necessarily understand where the rest of that funding works,
sure,
how that works?
So some of the funding is already kind of set aside. For instance, when you pay your water bill, you can't use the water funds to pay for police and fire. The money is for delivering the water, or the pipes, that type of thing. It's called an enterprise fund. And so all those monies are together. The airport is its own enterprise fund, where all the tie-down fees and everything out there goes to the airport operations. And the operations of the airport is amazing. It's in the black, not in the red. Doesn't take money from the city, but it's its own entity. So all these things are in their own silos, and we can't use those monies for the general fund, or paying for police, or potholes, etc. So that's what happens, is the whole budget is $170 million, but then you have the airport and water and sewer and all those things are in their own funds and can't be touched. So that's the big difference, and that's a huge difference in the budget. But hey, we have to deliver water to 59,000 people.
Well, and then so the city staff salaries then come out of the general fund.
Mostly, sometimes, of course, if you work in the water department, it can come out of that. If you do certain duties, and let's say you have 100% of your time, but 80% of the time you work on this, but 20% of the time you work on that, you can, and through a cost measure, allocate it towards different funds if you work on that. So if a finance person works 20% of his time on water-related issues, you can put 20% of his salary towards the water, because it is salaries towards that.
So, and then this is another good question, is all of government salaries are public information.
Yes.
And then, so how do citizens, if they find something they don't like in a city employee salary, what's the process to get involved?
To get involved, you can always go to a city council meeting and speak. There's an open comment section at the beginning of each meeting that you can talk about any subject that's not on the agenda. If it's on the agenda, you have another specific time to talk about it. You can email the city clerk, and if you email the city clerk, it's actually part of the public information. It gets replicated to all the council members and mayor, or you can email the council members and mayor directly, or you can email the city manager, who actually works for the city council. He's essentially the CEO of the city and does the day-to-day work on behalf of the council based on the direction of the council. And then, of course, the council members and mayor, they work for the citizens of Petaluma. So they, and hopefully me, if I'm honored to be elected, work for the citizens of Petaluma. So you tell them that they're your elected representatives. If you don't like something in the budget, then you need to tell them. And, I've gone through the budget. There's not a lot of fat. It's a long document. It's 398 pages in the last 2018-2019 budget. So 398 pages. However, if you don't have time to look at all 398 pages, there's a 10-page city manager overview That's very important. So if you just have time just to read that, take the time, read that, and see what the city's up against and what we're dealing with in the next 5 years. Now, the budget document is a 1-year document. However, they do talk in 5-year increments as well when we look into the future.
So you did touch on this a little bit, but we do have another public question. So outside of redevelopment fees, is there any, so I'm going to reframe it a little bit. So is there any other funding for infrastructure, and then how can we plan for better roads and other sort of infrastructure? And I'll follow up with another question, but maybe you want to address with that first.
Sure. Since it's infrastructure related questions, so potholes, etc. One of the big things is if you look at our budget in the street fund, we have about $5.4 million that's set aside for our streets, our roads, our infrastructure, potholes, etc. Inside that, we have the normal gas taxes that we're all used to. We have another separate line item for the second piece of gas tax, which was SB1, that is on the ballot to be repealed by Proposition 6. There's another piece of it that's the franchise fees that is from Recology, our garbage contractor, and then some Measure M dollars, the 2004 Measure M, not the current Measure M that's on the ballot for the library. So all those together is about $5.4 million. So the first off, to answer the question directly, I think it's very important that since the city has already shown with the little funds they do have in the street funds, they can actually do a lot with the few funds they have. It's very important that we make sure that Proposition 6 does not pass, and I'm personally not supporting Proposition 6, and I would encourage a no vote on that.
Expand on that, what
sure.
it is.
Well, that's the repeal of SB1, which is 12. I think it's 12 cents of the gas tax. Now, most people say, "Oh, gas is so expensive." You're right. Gas is expensive. We need more competition. However, the city has shown that it can leverage those dollars and actually pay for the infrastructure. So the monies can't be used for general fund. It's actually dedicated to roads and infrastructure. So that's very key that happens, and we can continue to leverage that, because that's another $5 million over the next 5 years.
And I get this question constantly since we've been talking a lot about structure of governance and operations. What is the city council and mayor actually offered while in their position monetarily? I get that question all the time. Yeah.
Well, it's in the city's charter that the city council gets paid $5 a meeting, and the mayor gets twice that, $10 a meeting, and it's in the city charter. So it actually have to take a vote of the people in order to change that. And it was the last time it was challenged or put on the ballot was 1998, and it failed to increase the how much city council members make.
I just bring that up because a lot of people always ask me, like, they get a salary to be in those positions, right?
And it's not a popular thing to end up paying them, but you end up with a lot of people that are either retired or something that if you want a mix of people on the city council, you probably in the future, and I'm not advocating for this at all, but in the future, pay your council members in some capacity in the next 6-10 years or something in the future when budgets are different, because you can't do that now, or you'll end up with just retired folks on the council, and you want a mix of the community representing on the council.
And then do you quickly want to, I'm going back to the questions before, make sure, do you want to touch on what committees and commissions do actually exist in the city of Petaluma? Because that's a question I get a lot. A lot of people ask me, I get a lot of questions about different issues, and I don't always have the answer. But a lot of people ask me about the different committees and commissions, and, really short because we don't have a whole lot of time, but what are those, and then what capacity, whether they're advisory or what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, they're all advisory. You have the Planning Commission, which is a lot of work, and you deal with land use issues there. You have a Parks and Recs Commission, which is kind of self-explanatory in terms of our Parks and Recs. You have an Airport Commission. That was one I had more fun on that commission than almost any when I was on the airport, because I knew nothing about the airport operations when I joined the council. Now I know a lot about it because I was on that commission for numerous years. So there's many commissions, from the Youth Commission, and just kind of, if you want to get involved, just go to the cityofpetaluma.net. Go to the city clerk's website. Make sure you sign up for when the notifications happen, because usually each April, May-ish, in that range, the city council appoints to these open positions. So if you want to get involved in your government, you can get involved in the Planning Commission, the Parks and Recs Commission, Airport Commission, Youth Commission, etc.
Art Commission.
And Art Commission. There's a Public Art Commission, which I heard they had a huge issue lately in terms of what they got involved with. So you can get involved with that commission as well. So there's a lot of commissions you can get involved with, or committees, and get involved. That's the key.
I don't want to get deep into that, but I think it goes back to the RFP and procurement process in the city, because there was a lot about the current community art, and then there was a lot about the animal shelter management, and I think there was a lot of misunderstanding about how that process works. So again, you kind of touched on it, but from a procurement standpoint, what actually occurs from the point, say, hey, we have to renegotiate this contract, or we have to allot this funding, and I will say that the community art, that's specifically earmarked for that, like you said before, because a lot of people are saying, let's use it for roads. That's just not an option.
Sure.
But from start to finish, what does it look like when that contract is ready to be negotiated?
Sure. So yeah, you're right on the art one. That's a 1% fee that's assessed on developers of above ground of how much it costs, and that put into an art fee that the art commission analyzes. But I'll focus on the animal services committee because I was part of that whole process. Since I'm not on the council now, I wasn't part of that art process in terms of the latest decision. But on the animal services, I remember during the downturn in the economy back in 2008 or so, we had to privatize a few things from janitorial to the animal shelter, and we actually outsourced it to this private foundation, which they managed it for many years, and as we did that process, we wanted to have a complete RFP process. This is now that the city was taking care of the animal shelter. But however, if we have a private entity take this over, these are the concepts we want them to make sure they take care of. So we had our city staff analyze it, and because we're dealing with animals here, we want to make sure that nothing happens to the animals through that process. So they took over the contract, and they had, I think, 2-3 year, if I remember correctly, terms with 1 year renewals after that. And then the contract came back up this last year for renewal. They did another RFP process, and three presentations were presented, and the council in there moved forward with who currently got the contract. So it's a whole process that that privatized one started back in 2008 and had a couple 3-year contracts and 1-year renewals.
Yeah, and that did change hands. I think that was again, I always encourage people to kind of, as best as you can, understand governance first, operations, and get into that. So I don't know, we're kind of in our last few minutes. Is there anything else you wanted to add or touch on before we leave here?
Just the other last thing, it's an inside baseball type of thing, but just keep following the city manager process. The city manager, who's been with us for 10 years, has decided to retire. He did I remember I was one of the votes to bring him here, and then all of a sudden 2008 happened, said, welcome to Petaluma, now do austerity policies. So he's been with us for 10 years, so we should thank him for the work that he's done. But now that he's decided to retire, now that he's at the end of November, so whoever the mayor, new council makeup is, this will be one of the biggest decisions, because this is the CEO of the city that does the day-to-day operations for the city after getting the direction from the city council. So it's going to be a huge issue. I personally think whomever takes over that position should have a strong background in economic development, because that's what we sorely need as a city. And I think that will look heavily upon that when you go through all the applications and resumes for that position. So I would ask the community to make sure there's a lot of transparency in that process, because even though that's an inside baseball decision, it's one of the biggest decisions that the council will make, that people don't realize the repercussions of that decision because of who that person could be. And I think it's very important for economic development.
And when exactly is that contract going to be put out, and then call it a contract? But
Sure.
When is that all going to happen?
Well, I haven't talked to him, but he said at the end of November that he is retiring, so take him at that word. So December 1st, it's officially going to be open, and the council, and I'm remembering the process that we went through last time, and they might be discussing this in closed session right now that I don't know, but before that we actually hired an outside person to do the recruiting for us, and they actually do a national search because it's a big position, and you get probably hundreds of responses. They whittle them down to X amount, and then the council decides to interview so many, and we probably interviewed close to 10 people last time in 2008. And I remember being in the Water Resources Department. We were in a room there and interviewing all the candidates. And at the end of the day, we came to John Brown. But it'll be a similar process like that, where the council as a whole interviews these people that come through after it's been vetted by an agency.
And this is just a random question I have, is how many, because we are talking about this position, how many city employees around are there that they oversee?
Well, overall, the city's around 330
Right.
employees. He has only so many direct reports. He isn't John, but whoever gets that position. But it's about 330-ish people in the entire city organization. So
a lot.
it's a decent size organization if it was equivalent to a business.
Awesome. Well, so thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I am going to just add that next Tuesday, 7 o'clock, I will have Michael Regan, who's running for council. And I did want to add, I just decided, that's why I can talk about it now, is I will be airing on the election night, and you'll get to hear a little bit about how I have processed all these issues, because I am learning as much as everyone else through this process. Finally, I do want to say that if you only got part of this video or you're trying to refer other people to it, the videos will be on Facebook if you're on Facebook, but then I also put them on my website, and that is www.domenica.ninja, and I'm trying to get those up there within a week or so. And also, I was asked to share the contact information. Again, you can get the contact information from the city clerk of all the candidates, but it will also be listed underneath that video if you are interested. So please direct all your questions directly to them. And then if you have questions for me, my contact is very easy. So we are at the end of the hour, and so I just want to say that you are listening again to State of the Union with DG the 30-something, and it is KPCA.FM, Petaluma 103.3 FM. Again, please check out our full schedule, including our candidate interviews at KPCA.FM. Thanks so much.